Well, the government's also promising health and social care workers in England an uninterrupted supply of personal protective equipment to avoid the problems seen during the first wave of the virus 6 months ago. The Department of Health and Social Care says 4-month stockpiles of items such as face masks and visors and gowns will be in place from November. Well, Dr. Duncan Robertson has held our hand through this since March. He's from Loughborough University's School of Business and Economics and has got his hand on the pulse when it comes to the numbers. Duncan, hi.
Hi, Ben. Hi.
So sort of here we are again. What are the? I mean, there is lots going on. First of all, let's talk a bit about the cases.
Yeah. So we're seeing these cases rise sort of, exponentially. I think one of the problems is that we're a little bit restricted about how much information we can get from them because, of course, if anybody's tried to get a test, we're still having this problem that you're not necessarily able to get a test. And so, as I said last week, it's really, we can see these case numbers as a minimum, but it's certainly not looking good. So we then have to look at other data, and that other data is things like people going into hospital. And of course, that is increasing too. So, it's definitely spreading out of control in this sort of R is greater than 1 phase. And obviously it's not looking terribly good.
There's lots to talk about the numbers, isn't there? And people are like, well, hospital is lagging behind, and the death rate, heaven forbid, is lagging behind. Does that all? How long does that take for these extra cases to begin to feed into those numbers?
Well, it probably takes about 5 days for you to actually, get infected, and then a couple of weeks for potentially people to go into hospital. And this lag is very important because, if you sort of respond, by putting new measures in place with the information you have now, then you're really looking at what's happening 2 or 3 weeks ago. So, the data is there, but it's really not telling you what the infection's doing now. It's telling you what the infection did 3 weeks ago.
Does the app help with any of this?
Absolutely. So, the app is very useful, and I think, I'd encourage anyone who hasn't downloaded it to do so. So the idea behind it, as the introduction said, was that if you come into close proximity with people, that will help, look at your the amount of exposure you've had. So people will put in they've had a positive test, and then it basically looks at who they've been in contact with, how, in terms of being close to, and then we'll warn those people to be, to self-isolate. And of course, it's moving from doing it because you want to do it to, potentially having fines if you don't. So obviously there's a slight change of emphasis coming in today about why you should do it. So, yeah.
And of course, the logging in business is important. Now, if I went to the fish market in Leicester on Thursday, sort of lunchtime-ish or just after the show, and I thought it was quite impressed that they'd already got a QR code set up outside for doing that.
Absolutely. And one of the early sort of criticisms of the contact tracing that was going on is, if you went to a pub or a restaurant, you would have to fill in a form that, a paper form potentially, which of course, people are reluctant to do because you don't necessarily want to give your personal details to the next customers and the people running the establishments. So this is a more automated way of doing it, and anything that can make that easy is a good thing.
Where are we with the science? Because I keep hearing experts say, look, that where we were 6 months ago is not where we are now with our understanding of the virus. Well,
yes and no. I think in terms of our response, I think we're fairly close to where we were 6 months ago. But of course, the government strategy is basically looking for, a vaccine to be in place. And, people are working as hard as they can on that. So, people are working round the clock, and the scientists are advising government as to what can be done. So, we've talked about SAGE, this Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. They have modelers and they have behavioural people who can advise the government in terms of anything they're planning to do in terms of policy. So, for instance, they'll be able to tell you what people are going to do if you close the pubs at 10 o'clock. Whether that information and advice is getting through to government is potentially a question.
Look, and it's interesting you raise this whole thing about the vaccine, and we know that there's an extraordinary global effort going on to try and find a vaccine. And I notice on the front page of the Eye today, though, that there are some questions about, well, okay, if we find a vaccine, that's not the end of the story, is it? I mean, even finding enough glass vials for it is going to be a challenge.
That's right. And, I think, once again, those things have been known. So when I was speaking to people in March or February about this, the first thing they said is, glass vials. So, this has been known for a long time. And so anything that comes up as a surprise perhaps shouldn't be. So, look back 6 months and look what we were talking about then, and you're not going to go that far wrong.
Is it? That's slightly worrying, that, though. Does that mean that if and when this second wave, and I don't know whether it's confirmed as the second wave yet or not, I mean, presumably there's a technical definition of that. Does that mean we're going to go through exactly the same thing all over again?
Well, that's really there's the science and there's the policy and there's the economic side of things and there's the health side of things. And I think, if people are looking at each one of those in isolation, then they're probably not going to get to the right answer. It needs to be a sort of a whole system type way of thinking. And, scientists have been predicting what will happen with the science and in terms of what will happen with the epidemic. And really it's up to, politicians and policymakers to take that evidence. I think someone said a few decades ago, advisors advise and politicians decide. And really it's up to the politicians to decide.
Duncan, always, you've been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on every Monday and just keeping an eye on this all for us. Thank you.
Thanks.
You're a star, thanks. There you are, Dr. Duncan Robertson from Loughborough University joining us, as he does every Monday, with just an update on where we are, where we're going, what the figures mean, that kind of stuff, trying to explain it all because it can become furiously complicated.